Welcome to the 523rd episode of the Jami Dulaney Plant-Based Wellness Podcast. My name is Jami Dulaney, and I'm your host. I'm a plant-based cardiologist and endurance athlete living in Southwest Florida. Welcome, and thank you for listening to this audio version. So if you're a longtime listener, you'll know that I'm starting to add video content every other week. Probably going to be doing a transition to mainly video, but if you'd like to give me some feedback, I'd love to hear it as well. You can find some reels on Instagram and Facebook to get a little clip, share with your friends. But let me know how you like the podcast. It's available on iTunes, Spotify, YouTube as well. Both versions will be, but obviously the video version is on YouTube, a better viewing probably. It'll also be linked to my website, drdulaney.com, DoctorDulane.com. So I just finished a very interesting book, came up on Facebook. I like the sound of it, so I downloaded it. It's called The Happiest Man on Earth by Eddie Jaku, Jaku. I highly recommend the book. Eddie is a Holocaust survivor, a centenarian, that actually, if you do the audiobook, he reads it, which makes it even more special. And he gave some marvelous takeaways that I think applies to life, but it applies to just about everything. But medicine in general, and that all that he went through and endured, one of the biggest takeaways he came away with was that you have to have hope to live, and life gives you hope. And I think that's a great, great message. Practicing medicine for 30 years, it has always been my mission to never take hope away. I think that you can extrapolate hope into mindset, even as simple as it's not zero. There's not zero of a chance. When Eddie was in the hospital after he was freed, the nurses and doctors were, looking very grim, and he was barely alive. And he finally asked one of the nurses, "What are they saying?" And she told him he had a 65% chance of dying. But to Eddie, that meant he had a chance of living. And he vowed that if he were to live and leave that hospital, he would live a life that's meaningful. And he certainly has. And again, I'll refer you to the book for further understanding of all that. But it just goes back to show you, and of course, all through his ordeal at Auschwitz and being captured and having some short freedoms and near-death experiences, he never lost hope. But his mindset is what really brought him through the whole ordeal. I hear people say they are suffering, even runners say they're suffering, people say they suffer with this or that, but Eddie, he truly suffered. And of course, suffering has different meanings for us, but listening to a book like that puts all that into perspective, and a lot of our suffering is things that we choose that's not cast upon us, but it's also on how we react to different situations, and the gravity that our mind puts on them is how bad they truly are. One of my observations, and it's just an observation, I think there might have been a couple papers looking at it that I've tried to research over the years, but a lot of Holocaust survivors ended up living to ripe old ages, 90s and 100s. There is a Air Force pilot, the book was Unbroken, I'm going to block on his name right now, but again, was in a concentration camp for many, many years, lived well into his 90s. I also have had the pleasure of knowing a couple of prisoner of wars that have lived to ripe old ages. And it's not because they had a perfect life afterwards or had a perfect diet. They certainly weren't vegan. But what they all seemed to have in common was this terrible, terrible stress that they had during the war, stress and starvation. And I often wondered if the body reset itself like a terrible fasting trial when there's starvation. I mean, they had terrible food, lacking in majority of nutrients and macronutrients, but it was a reset of their cells, a cleaning out of sorts that they came out at at perhaps a biological age younger than what they went into. And the other thing that has impressed me with a lot of these survivors is that despite being severely calorically restricted during their confinement, they didn't come out and have trouble with their weight. The majority of them were not morbidly obese. Actually, none of them that I have come across. And again, it's not been, a randomized study by any stretch of the imagination, but it didn't follow the rules that we give people today that perhaps their metabolism is ruined by dieting, so to speak. And of course, dieting in today's terms versus starvation in the terms of World War II and the camps have nothing in common. But it doesn't seem that these people had this metabolic derangement that kept them from, or they constricted, or that they, I guess, absorbed everything that they ate and had trouble with their weight later on. So the question is why? Most likely, and it seems as though it's not a metabolic issue, but perhaps even a mindset issue more so than anything, is that perhaps these people, they were very mindful of what they ate. Obviously, they weren't overeaters when they had the opportunity, but perhaps they were more mindful of and appreciative of the food that they ate and understood their bodies more and what their bodies needed, perhaps. I don't know. But what I do observe is that, again, despite the deficit in vitamins and minerals and nutrients and macronutrients, they live to a ripe old age. And Eddie talked about even having struggles after he was released with boils and having to have treatment because of all the poor food that he'd eaten, and it probably took a while to get his gut back in shape and condition. So it wasn't an immediate release back into regular life for sure, and probably not even a release into abundance. But nevertheless, this severe shortage did not seem to cause problems long term. And it makes me start to wonder about most of our lifestyle diseases. It's not, for the majority, an underfed state or an underabundance, but an overfed state. And that takes me into an article that I came across on proton pump inhibitors, and omeprazole, Prilosec is one of those, and it decreases the acid production in the stomach for people that have reflux or ulcers. And the worry is that if you have severe reflux, then that acid can lead to erosion of the esophagus and increase the risk for esophageal cancer. So we don't want that to happen. And of course, people that have had ulcers or stomach issues, that indigestion, burning in the stomach, sick feeling is something that you like to get rid of right away. And these proton pump inhibitors do a fabulous job at decreasing acid production and decreasing those symptoms and such that ulcers can heal. So we are treating a symptom of overproduction of acid in order to make the patient heal from the ulcer. But just like any other medication, they're rarely discontinued. And they're rarely discontinued because we're not treating the underlying etiology of the increased acid and ulcer to begin with. So we're treating the end result. And in this study, it actually looked at an increased risk of hypertension in menopausal women that were on Prilosec. Now, again, small study, observational. Menopausal women are starting to get hypertension anyway, vascular disease. But the problem with the proton pump inhibitors is they decrease the production of nitric oxide or block the production of nitric oxide. And nitric oxide is what the endothelial cell produces to cause dilatation of the blood vessel and so make it more relaxed and decrease blood pressure, but it also dilates the blood vessels to the coronary arteries. So we know that Prilosec and proton pump inhibitors increase the risk of potential risk for myocardial infarction or vascular disease. They decrease the risk for multiple vitamin absorption, increase the risk of osteoporosis. So they have a big side effect profile despite helping people to get over their acid reflux and continue eating the way they eat. The interesting thing is that people that fast don't have an excessive amount of acid production and don't get ulcers. People that are low weight, so underfed, don't have the production of a large amount of acid and ulcer disease. We also know that people that eat a diet rich in animal products, particularly meat products, have to have acid to digest those foods, so they tend to have a higher acid production. And we know that animals that are carnivores have a very much more acidic stomach than much more acidic stomach than omnivores, which humans are. And so we don't usually make the acid, and that's probably part of the problem, is that with excessive consumption of animal products, we can't kind of keep up and digest, and that's when the stomach maybe stays fuller longer, and these reflux symptoms start to occur, and the ulcer burning of the stomach, basically because stomach contents are still floating around. So it brings me back to my, again, aha moment, is that, again, we're not treating the underlying cause with these proton pump inhibitors. The underlying cause is overconsumption of perhaps food in general, and particularly highly foods that need a lot of acid to digest, so animal products. So ulcer disease is another lifestyle disease based on what we eat. So we can link many of our lifestyle diseases as we age to what we are consuming. And yet we worry about not having enough of continuously. So are we getting enough protein? Are we getting enough good fat? Are we getting enough omega-3s? That is the consensus around the worry that's spread, but we're not looking at these lifestyle diseases that are actually from overconsumption and not underconsumption. Hypertension, increased fat consumption, increased sodium consumption, increased volume consumption. Vascular disease, increased saturated fat consumption. Most of our cancers, again, linked to the carcinogens associated with what we eat as well as exposure. So it's overexposure, overconsumption that leads to these lifestyle diseases, not underconsumption. Even if you look at activity, it's usually overdoing it that causes a problem as far as injury versus not doing enough of. Now, I'm not making a ploy for sedentary lifestyle because, again, on that end of the spectrum, there's a problem as well. But we tend to overdo when an injury occurs as opposed to being mindful enough to back off just enough to push to the very limit, but not quite there. And it's a sort of a reset. It's not always a bad thing, but it's a sort of a reset that our bodies go back and forth, and then you come upon this big question of balance. So balance in nutrition, enough, but not too much. Enough exercise, but not too much. Our minds tend to want more of as opposed to less of. And perhaps it's a protective mechanism, but perhaps it's just a misreading. And we all tend to want balance in our lives, but again, very few people achieve it, and I'm not so sure that balance is what we're really should be looking for as much as movement from one end of the spectrum to the other. So more of a dynamic flow as opposed to just kind of staying right in the middle all the time. So one thing you can think about, are you a too much or a too little person? You're an extreme person. People will say, well, I can't eat just one Oreo. I have to eat the sleeve, or I have to eat the whole box of chocolates if it's there. If there's a cake, even if I put it into portion sizes and put it in the freezer, I'll go back to the freezer until it's all gone. I sit down and I read the whole book, so all or nothing type of thing. Running till you drop as far as exercise, or, just being all in. I've been accused of being all in when it comes to things. If there's something I'm studying, I tend to get all the books that I can and get my hand on all the literature that I can read about something and do the deep dive. into things. And of course, running, if you listen to this podcast, it's pushing to see what my limits are. But I've never been that kind of a person when it comes to food. And I've always been mindful of what I was eating and the portion size, mainly because of family history. So I probably am better at knowing my limits at food than I am knowing my limits at exercise. And so I tend to push, so the balance becomes more of a difficulty on that end. So you can assess yourself as far as what you might consider having trouble with balance, and see, what your mindset does and how that plays out for you individually. And we're going to talk about that a little bit more. There's a curve that I've referred to in the podcast over the years. It looks like the bell curve for the most part, so a big hump in the middle, lower on the outsides. Most everybody's heard of the bell curve. You're either way up on the high achievement or way down on the lower achievement, or the majority of people are in the middle. And again, society, most people would have you say that in the middle would be a great place to kind of hang out. You're not to one extreme or the other, and you're in balance. But I don't know that many people live there, and I'm not so sure that's a great place to be. It's kind of a hovering type of place. Another way of looking at it is the early adopters. So people that when something new comes out, they want to try it. They're at one end of the extreme, versus people that may still be hanging on to a flip phone someplace. They didn't want to get an iPhone or a smartphone or a smartwatch. They're late adopters, so to speak. And there's people that are just as the curves start to go up, that are watching to see if this is a good way to change or not. So that's kind of where the majority of us lie in a lot of situations. But growth and learning seem to occur most at both ends. You have the most to gain, the most to lose by not moving from either one of those ends. So an early adopter takes risk on new behaviors. A late adopter takes risk on waiting too late to adopt new behaviors. But moving and changing in those areas both have probably have the most risk, but they also have the most reward. It can be a slippery slope with different personalities. Again, people that are prone to be very aggressive at weight loss can go too far. Too aggressive with exercise potentially can go too far. And so it requires a mindfulness of how far that you're pushing. But again, both people are moving along the curve. And it's kind of amazing when I've talked to people over the years that a lot of people don't notice where they are in the curve. And maybe it's a place that we don't like to look of to see, where we kind of stuck and afraid to move, and where we move too much, or the fear of moving too much or too little along that curve. I started out as a golfer. My family all golfed. I started golfing at a young age. I golfed with my dad. And when you golf, you're using different clubs to get to a certain distance to get to the hole. So you start out with a driver, which you can hit the furthest, a 3-wood, all the way down to a wedge, and ultimately your putter. If you're not a golfer, everybody knows a good bit about this. But there are markers on the golf course. There's a line, at least there used to be, last time I golfed, at 150 marker. Now there's all kinds of finders and viewfinders, and your watch tells you. But back in the day, you had to look on the cart path or some sign somewhere, dirt path, that they had marked. It was 150 yards to the center of the green. And based on that distance, you would select a club. And I became very proficient at estimating yardage, whether it was from that 150 another 10, 20 yards out, or 10, 20 yards in. So it became somewhat of a game for me to know 10-yard increments about where I stood, and to be able to visualize it without really counting down the yardage. I didn't walk it, I just visualized it. And the markage 150 was to the center of the green, so then you would take into account where the pin was, the hole, to get it as close as you can when you were selecting a club and how you would swing and so forth. The idea of the game is obviously get the ball in the hole. But the point I'm trying to make in a long-winded fashion was estimating distance and being aware of the distance and counting down and selecting the accuracy of being able to select the right club and the right swing for that distance. And it all came down to being aware of the distance. Now with running, I kind of look at mileage. So it's a quarter mile to the house, it's a half mile to the house. If I do this route, it's 5.1 mile or 5.2. And I like to be able to look on intervals and see in 2 minutes I'm going to get this far and see how close I can come. So I like looking at the distance and being mindful of that distance. But sometimes we don't get it right. If you apply it to some illnesses, if you have a GI bug and, all of a sudden you get sick and you're having diarrhea and vomiting, and the first thing you do is look back to the last thing you ate before you got sick and you blame it. And it's pretty funny because most people never blame their favorite food. They blame the food that they like the least amount on what that is. And so there's no scientific measurement of what caused the illness. I mean, I guess if you ate, you can line it up to you ate in a restaurant and smelled funny or something was bad. But for the most part, we don't have a clue, and we just blame it on the last thing that we ate that we didn't like the most. And we come to that conclusion. We might hang on to that for years on end, that this causes a problem. And I've had people come into the office saying they have allergies to things or intolerance to things that there's really not a whole lot of concrete evidence. It just happened in time, and they held on to that belief. The other thing that happens is calorie counters. People have different apps on their phone, or they measure. Weight Watchers was the first thing. They counted points. But people assume that they're really, really good at making these estimates of the calorie counters. And there's been, almost every study done on nutrition has really proven that people are not accurate when it comes to counting calories, because there's so much variability. It might be one thing if you're at home and you're measuring every little thing, but if you eat out or somebody else prepares it, it's just all goes out the window. And of course, you have to remember what you picked up when you went by it and all this other kind of thing. So inherently, they're 20 to 40% inaccurate all the time. But yet we hang on to, and almost everybody comes in, eats 1,200 calories. Because 1,200 calories was put out a long time ago by the American Diabetic Association, that 1,200 calories was that was a really strict diet that people lost weight on. So everybody says they're eating either 1,200 calories or less, when the majority of time that's not accurate, especially if they're still gaining weight or they're not losing weight. But it becomes a mindset that we're good at these things and it can't be wrong, and there's got to be something wrong another way. So one way to counteract that is to just mark on the calendar how many times you got food prepared by somebody else. So whether it was takeout or you went to a restaurant or you went to somebody's house, if you just mark that on a calendar and you look at your weekly weight loss, you can get an idea. That week I lost weight and I went out 3 times, or that week I gained weight and I went out 4 times. And you can get a rough estimate that the more I go out, the more weight I gain. You can make it even more clear if you start to look at the type of restaurant. So if I ate Mexican 3 times last week and I gained 4 pounds, is it how the Mexican food was cooked when I got it? Was it the salt content? But you can start to estimate it. But that's a really good way to just say, I got too much of, and link it to something, as opposed to my calories are spot on, I don't know why I'm not losing any weight. Because you're never going to necessarily figure out, what was in the food that you ate. No matter how much you ask, it's probably going to get served up just like it was made from the scratch before you ever walked into the door. But you have to be willing to look at those things to see why there's an issue and notice them and bring it back to a fairly short range and listening to body cues. Putting it to myself, training for these next coming races. In 2 weeks, actually in a week, I have a 50-mile race, and then 3 weeks later I have a 100-mile race. So I'm training like I've never trained before, and I'm trying to push as far as I can to get the maximum amount of training but the least amount of injury. So I want to get to the start line feeling healthy, but I don't want to leave anything in the closet that I could have done to make myself better. And that's a really fine line. And so when I start to have a niggle or an injury, I blame the thing that I like the least, which typically is strength training. So I'm trying to running is the goal, so I'm not going to blame my running for causing a problem. I'm going to and it's not like I don't like strength training. It's just that I'm afraid that it's going to interfere with my running, which I like the best, just like the food. It's the same concept. So when something starts to hurt, I immediately look to the weight training as to what caused it. When the reality of it is it's a combination of a lot of different things. My volume might be increased, speed work might be increased, the exercise might be increased, I might do something different and push it just a little bit more than I should have. So sorting all that out becomes very, very difficult. To say, well, I'm just not going to do any more strength training would not be a good idea, because then I would lose the gains that I've made. And clearly the strength training has helped keep me healthy, and it's helped improve my speed and mobility, and I need the muscle mass. So I need the strength training. I need the right dose of the strength training, and that's when it becomes difficult, just like I need the right dose of running. And how much is it to push further, and how much do you back off? And we like to say, well, I'm going to listen to my body, but listening to the cues and then making a mind judgment often doesn't correlate very well, because we jump to conclusions with a little bit of information. I heard a great quote by Rachel Intrekken. Pronounced her name wrong, but she likes it when you say it that way because it sounds like you're trucking on. She said in the podcast, but she said, I like to push to just barely where I can hold on. And I think that is kind of great for everything. We want to move the dial. We want to push our limits into the uncomfortable zone enough that we're making progress, but not too much that we blow up or fall off or get injured or get sick. We want to push into the zone, into the edge of those curves that we're learning and growing, but not regressing. That would be called coasting. When I was young, my granddad would take us for a ride down a hill by the house in his Galaxy Ford 500, and we'd go to the top of the hill, he'd put it in neutral and see how far we could coast. And so we'd always, did we get to this house or that house, or how far did we get? And that would be our entertainment before dinner on this old country road. But the reality of it is that it didn't take very long for, we started going out fast, but then we were losing momentum as we coasted. And that's how we live a lot of our lives sometime, is that we're coasting. We think that we've got to a place that we're happy. Perhaps you've lost the 25 pounds that you wanted, and you're just going to hang on or coast, but that never happens. You start coasting you actually start losing ground, and the weight starts coming back on. Or you think that you got to a level, you finished that half marathon, and you think you're doing great, and you're just going to maintain right there, and the next thing you know is that you're drifting backwards. So the reality of it is we never get to stay in the middle of that curve. We're drifting one way or another, and we have to keep that push to just keep moving forward and learning and evolving. And to not do that is to cease moving and to cease growing, and that's not a good outcome. Eddie Jaku is still doing public speaking at age of 100. You can, I'll make a link to his TED Talk. Gives you a little synopsis. If you don't want to read his whole book, I suggest you read his whole book. But he continued to grow and give back after he was free. He didn't rest on his laurels. He was given a grant to start a new life in Australia. He gave the money back. He wanted to help other people, and his whole life has been spent on educating people and helping them to get a start or to move forward a little bit and lead by example. And I think we all need to keep questioning where we are on that curve. And when you have an illness, a lifestyle disease of sort, or something goes wrong with your health, or you're just not feeling right from a knee hurts or hip hurts, what is it that you can do to make it better? And you need to remember that you can always make it better. There's always hope that it will get better, and that you will get better and overcome what it is that's ailing you, and you may come back better on the other side. It may involve some form of therapy, but there's always hope that you can make it better. And it starts right between your ears in your mindset that you can do it. And you can push into that uncomfortable zone, or into that zone that you're not sure that you're going to make it, be able to hang on in that, and to that level of effort, just into that uncomfortable zone, and just see what happens. And remember that too much of is probably never going to be the benefit. So too much food, too many Oreos, but too much of any food is not necessary or necessarily good for you. So more of macronutrients and more of this, it probably going to end up causing you more grief than not, and to fear the not enough of is probably not where you want to be. So take a little time to kind of assess yourself, where you are on some of the scales of tend to be early adopter or a late adopter, or you tend to overdo on this area of your life and underdo on that area of your life, and see if you can see where your mindset comes in and be a little bit more mindful in those areas, and you too might be able to move the notch. So I'm going to do it myself, and thank you, Eddie, for your kind words in the book. Again, I'll make a link to the book to read it, and I believe that most people can get off the majority of their medications, and we have to remember that there are side effects to all of these medications. So let's look at the underlying cause and move the needle forward. If you'd like us to help you in assessing your health and how you might be able to get off medications or become healthier, check out our website, drdulaney.com, DOCTORDULANEY. You can email me at Jami, Jami, at drdulaney.com with questions. We'd love to hear from you. There's multiple levels of membership that you can do. We have lectures weekly, cooking demonstrations, mobility demonstrations. So we are dedicated to making people and helping people become the healthiest versions of themselves. So thank you always for listening.